Hello, this is Miss Elizabeth, and this is part 2 of My Teacher is an Alien. The door was unlocked. Trying not to make any noise, I turned the knob and pushed. The door opened without a sound. I hesitated for just a moment, then stepped in. I was standing in a hallway. To my left, I saw an empty living room. And I do mean empty. Except for curtains, there wasn't one bit of furniture or decoration in the room. The walls and the floor were totally bare. I flinched as I heard another burst of horrible squawking and growling above me. Taking a deep breath, I began to tiptoe up the stairs. I was glad I was wearing sneakers. About halfway up, I stopped and thought, what am I doing? I should get out of here while I can. Now, you may not believe this, but the only reason I didn't turn back was that I thought that Mr. Smith might really be in trouble. Even though I didn't like the man, I didn't want anything horrible to happen to him. So I swallowed and I took another step. The noise stopped. Was everything over? Would Mr. Smith start down the steps and find me standing here? I was just about to turn and run when another round of squawking and shrieking made it clear that whatever was happening was still going on. I still wanted to run, but I was afraid to. Afraid that if I did, I might read in the paper the next day that something terrible had happened to Mr. Smith. Something I could have prevented. Of course, I was afraid to keep going, but I decided I didn't have any choice. I took another step and then another. I held on to the railing as if it were my lifeline. The knot in my stomach got tighter and tighter with every step I took. When I got near the top, I lay down on my stomach. I had read somewhere that when you're peering around a corner, you're less likely to be seen if your head is low. So I kept my head as low as possible. If I could have pulled out an eyeball and just stuck it around the corner to take a peek, that would have been fine with me. The hall was as empty as the living room. No pictures on the walls, no rugs on the floor. There, through an open door at the end of the hall, I could see a small blue bedroom. Closer to me on the right was another open door. The horrible sound seemed to be coming from there. I decided low was the way to go. Still on my belly, I slithered down one side of the hallway until I had reached the doorway. I shivered. That noise was like a tiger running its claws down the side of a blackboard. It felt like aluminum foil against my teeth. What could be making it? When I finally got up the nerve to sneak a look around the bottom edge of the door, I saw Mr. Smith sitting at a little makeup table looking in a mirror. Stacy was right. The man was handsome. He had a long, lean face with a square jaw and a straight nose and cheekbones to die for. Only it was fake. As I watched, Mr. Smith pressed his fingers against the bottom of his eyes, and suddenly he ran his fingertips to the side of his head, grabbed his ears, and started peeling off his face. I gasped. Fortunately, the horrible noises coming from the room drowned it out. I wanted to get up and run, but I was too terrified to move. I started to shake instead. Whatever Mr. Smith was, I was pretty sure the face he was slowly uncovering wasn't anything that had been born on the planet Earth. As he stripped away the mask, I could see that he had skin the color of limes. His enormous orange eyes slanted upward away from his nose like a pair of butterfly wings. A series of muscular-looking ridges stretched from his eyes down to his lipless mouth. Soon the handsome face of Mr. Smith was lying on the dressing table. The creature that had been hidden beneath it began to massage his face, his real face. "Oh," he said, "what a relief." He smiled and saw himself in the mirror, showing 2 rows of round, purplish teeth. I had noticed that the horrible noise was coming from a pair of flat pieces that hung on the wall. But it wasn't until Mr. Smith started singing along with the sound that I realized the plastic sheets were speakers. That hideous noise was music. At least what passed for music wherever my alien teacher came from. I was still trying to find the courage to start backing up when the alien turned down the music and flipped a switch on the table. The mirror began to shimmer. Suddenly the image of Mr. Smith was replaced by another alien face, this one just as horrible. Beyond the face I could see a big room with other aliens hustling and bustling backwards and forth. From the looks of things, this might have been a spaceship. The face in the mirror said something that sounded like "rrr." The words were low and growly. "Broxham reporting," said Mr. Smith. The face in the mirror made some more growly noises. "Oh, it's good to hear our mother tongue, Mr. Smith, or Broxham, or whatever his name was. I can't wait to return to the ship and have this language implant removed so I can speak the true tongue and not this barbaric garble." "Hey," I thought, "whose language are you calling barbaric garble?" But before I could get too angry, I heard something else. Something that sent a cold chill down my spine. "The testing process is on schedule," said Broxham. "Before long, I will have selected the student I wish to bring back for study." Bring back for study? I couldn't believe my ears. My teacher was an alien, and even worse, he had come to Earth to kidnap kids and take them into space. The face on the screen smiled. At least I think it smiled. It's hard to tell with somebody who looks that bad. Let's just say that all its teeth were showing. Then it made a long speech in that awful language. It felt like somebody was grinding metal next to my ear. I don't know what it said, but it made Broxham laugh. Well, I suppose it was a laugh. His shoulders shook as if he were laughing, and the sound made my stomach turn. When Broxham stopped laughing, or whatever, he reached down and turned off the screen, and the other alien faded from view. Time for me to get out of here. I slithered backwards on my belly, down the hall and then down the stairs. I heard that alien music come on again. I relaxed a little. On the porch, I hesitated for a moment. Should I try to recover my note? A noise in the house made up my mind for me. Compared to what was behind me, any trouble I might get into because of that note was nothing. I jumped off the porch and ran all the way home, praying that Broxham hadn't seen me. Did you ever have something awful happen to you and not really react to it till later? Like you might have almost gotten hit by a car on your way home from school, but you didn't start shaking until after supper? It was like that with me that afternoon. It wasn't until I got home that what I'd seen really began to sink in. I ran up to my room, plowed my way through the mess, and collapsed on my bed. I lay there until supper, staring at the ceiling and shaking with fear. What was I going to do? What would you do if you found out your teacher was an alien? Go to the principal? Tell your parents? Think about that for a minute. Imagine the conversation. Not a pretty thought, is it? The only person who might believe me was Weird Peter Thompson. I decided to tell him what I'd seen. If I couldn't convince him, I knew I didn't have a chance of convincing anyone. I must have looked pretty bad when I went down to dinner because my mother asked me 3 times what was bothering me. But then she tends to be a bit fussy. I try never to let her hear me sneeze because if she does, she decides I've got pneumonia and tries to pack me into bed for a week. Well, all right, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. She and my dad are always battling over how much freedom they should give me. Come on, Margaret, my dad will say. She's in 6th grade now. You can't treat her like a baby anymore. Oh, Edward, my mother will reply, you seem to think you can treat Susan the same way you would treat a boy. Can you imagine she actually says that? Anyway, that night at supper, she put her hand on my forehead and clucked about how pale I looked. I think she was actually disappointed that I didn't have a fever. At least then she would have known what to do. Are you still upset about Miss Swartz, Susan? She asked, shoveling a load of broccoli onto my plate. Actually, at the moment, I was more upset about the broccoli. But Miss Swartz was a close second, so I nodded weakly. Well, I can tell you it wasn't Dr. Bleakman's fault, she said. In fact, he's very upset that Mrs. Swartz didn't give him more notice. I talked to Helen. She told me Mrs. Swartz didn't even have the courtesy to tell Dr. Bleakman she was leaving. He got a letter the first day of vacation saying she wouldn't be back. That left him 6 days to find someone to take her place. Well, I think he did very well, finding that handsome Mr. Smith in such a short period of time. Mr. Smith is ruining our class, I said bleakly. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Susan, Mom said. I'm planning to be an actress when I grow up. I need to be dramatic. Besides, this so-called teacher was going to kidnap some of my classmates and drag them off to outer space. Suddenly I realized that I had been putting off the truth. He wasn't going to kidnap some of my classmates. If he was going to pick someone from my class, I might well be on that list. In fact, after he read my note, I might be his #1 prospect. I swallowed hard. I was dying to tell my folks what had happened, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. That night I tried to call Peter, but I couldn't get any answer at his house. Come on, Peter, I hissed at the phone. Where are you? I need you. I let it ring 15 times. No answer. I tried again an hour later. Still no answer. I was as nervous as a marshmallow at a bonfire. It was even worse when I had to go to school the next morning. I didn't think Broxham knew I had been in his house, but what if I'd left some kind of clue behind? Or what if he had some kind of an alien super sense that would let him know I'd be there? What about that weird muscular nose? Just how powerful was his sense of smell? Would he know I'd been snooping around by my odor? I watched his nose carefully when I walked through the class door that morning. It didn't twitch or anything, but that didn't mean much. Maybe underneath that mask, his real nose had sniffed me out. Maybe it was sending him a message even now. There she is. That's the one who was in the house yesterday. I sat down. I was so tense I felt as if I would explode if anyone so much as touched me. I wanted to pass Peter a note asking him to meet me on the playground at recess, but I was in enough trouble because of notes already. We stood up and said the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Mr. Smith motioned me to his desk. I think you lost something yesterday, he said, and then he handed me my note. I sat at my desk and stared at the note. What was going on here? Was Broxham playing with me? For a moment, the thought that he was actually being a nice guy crossed my mind, and I brushed that away. Nice guys don't kidnap sixth graders and drag them into outer space. I decided it was more likely he was just sending me a message. I've got your number. Don't mess with me. I was so wrapped up in trying to figure out what was going on that I could barely concentrate on my work. Most of the time I just sat and stared at Broxham's face, trying to figure out how that mask was attached. And when I started to wonder if there was any way I could pull it off, my imagination began cooking up a horrible scene. In this daydream, I saw myself grab Broxham's ears and begin pulling on them, trying to unmask him. Only the mask wouldn't come off, and I pulled harder and harder, and suddenly his face began to stretch and twist all out of shape. But the mask still wouldn't come off. It was gross. Stop it, I said to my brain. But the vision kept coming back. Sometimes I wonder about my brain. I mean, it seems to have a mind of its own. If it was really my brain, you'd think I'd have a little bit more control over it, wouldn't you? But when you get right down to it, brains are pretty weird. But not as weird as having an alien for a teacher. By the middle of the morning, I was beginning to wonder if this whole alien business had been a bad dream. It seemed too impossible to believe. But I knew I hadn't been dreaming. It was real. My teacher was an alien. I couldn't wait to get Peter aside so I could talk to him. When recess came, I tried to act calm as I wandered over to the wall where Peter usually sat to read. He was sitting on the ground, cross-legged, clutching a book called A Princess of Mars in his skinny hands. I slid down the wall and sat beside him. He acted as if he didn't notice me. Maybe he really didn't. He was one of those kids who could get so wrapped up in a book it'd take a bomb to get his attention. I hated to interrupt him. Peter always seemed a little unhappy to me, like he understood that he just didn't fit in with the rest of us. The only thing I knew that made him happy was reading science fiction. He always had a book hidden behind his school book. The neat thing was, it didn't make any difference because he was so brilliant that whenever the teacher asked him a question, he always knew the answer. I could never forget. I could never figure out how or why they wouldn't just leave him alone and let him read. But that's the way school is, I guess. So, what's going on? I asked. What a stupid line, huh? I'm glad I'm a girl because when I get older, the guys are going to have to come up with lines to tell me. Peter lifted his nose out of his book and looked at me as if I were the alien. He blinked, and I realized he was trying to come back to the real world, and I felt bad for interrupting him. In class, he had to read with one eye on the teacher. Out here, he planned on shutting out everything for a while. I hesitated for a minute. How was I going to say this? Finally, I just decided to jump right in, and I said, I need your help. Peter looked surprised. For what? He asked. I realized I hadn't jumped in after all. The biggie was still to come. Promise you won't laugh? I asked. Peter shrugged. Sure, I promise. All right, listen. I know you're not going to believe this, but I found out something awful yesterday. Mr. Smith is an alien. He's come here to kidnap a bunch of kids and take them back to outer space. I held my breath to see what Peter would say. I thought he might laugh or tell me to get lost and this thought really scared me, shout it out to everyone else. To my astonishment, he didn't do any of those things. He just looked at me as if he was going to cry. What's the matter? I asked. You should know, he said, and he sniffed and wiped the back of his hand across his nose. What was going on here? I had a sudden thought that maybe he was an alien too. But that was stupid, of course. But I had aliens on the brain, and I couldn't figure out what else it might be. I don't know. I said, honest, I don't. He looked at me, and his eyes were so sad they made me want to cry too. I always thought you were the one kid in this class who was on my side, he said. Like that time you tried to stop Duncan when he was beating me up. I expect everyone else to tease me. I just never thought you would do it. Now it was my turn to be mad. I'm not teasing, I yelled. Then I lowered my voice. I'm not teasing. I'm serious. Peter stared at me. Is this some kind of game? He asked. I hesitated. If I told him the truth, he probably wouldn't believe me. If I told him it was a game, he might at least help. What a fix. The only way I could get him to believe me was to lie to him. Yeah, I said. I thought you were the one guy in this class with enough imagination to play, but now you've ruined it. No, said Peter. No, we can still play. Just pretend you had to tell me it was a game to get me to believe you. My head was starting to spin. Peter was using my reason for lying as a reason to pretend that he believed what was a game was for real. Or something like that. This was getting too complicated for me. This was going to be one of those weeks, I thought. The only person I can count on for help stopping an alien invasion thinks the whole thing is a game. Well, as my grandmother always says, you make do with what you got. And Peter was what I had. I decided to stop worrying about who was believing what and just tell him what had happened. Well, I said when I was done, what do you think we should do? Peter stared at the sky for a moment. He rubbed his chin as if he was thinking really hard. And then he gave me his answer. We've got no choice, he said. We have to break into Broxham's house to look for evidence. And we'll see how that goes in part 3.